Hello, this video is meant to introduce the idea of subqueries, which will be required for you to be successful in the projects that you will experience in our class. So to get started, you'll notice that my servers are running. So there's my MySQL instance is operational. I've already opened the MySQL workbench, and in this video I am going to use the world database. So obviously you've got to make sure that you have that use world statement in place. And over here you can of course see that I do have the world database created. So I'm going to show you three different examples today. Two of them are going to involve subqueries, and one of them is going to involve the creation and use of a temporary table. So you'll notice this first example, it is a subquery in a where clause. So as you can see here, it's pretty basic. I want the name, the population from the country table where the name is the Russian Federation. We're going to go through this sequentially to show you how we would build this and then how we would actually make it look correct. So with this in place, I go ahead and run it. And there we have the results. So the Russian Federation has a population of, what is that? 146, almost 147 million. There's our basic information. Now, let's just say that we were not very bright and we really didn't understand how to use a subquery. And so we want to get to know how many other countries in the world have a larger population than the Russian Federation. Let's go ahead and run with that scenario. We could come down here and we could copy the population. All right, so we're going to adjust our query now. So here is our new query. Now you'll notice that we're saying, hey, we want the name of the country, we want the population of that country from the country table where the population is greater than whatever that value was that we had from the Russian Federation. There's our query. We're going to go ahead and run this. And here are the results. So all of these countries have a population greater than this. The problem with this, however, is that we may not know what the population of the Russian Federation is. And so this is where a subquery being used in the where clause can really come in handy, because rather than trying to go and copy that number and paste it in here and then running our query, we can just say, go out and find out what this number is. And once you have it, then run the rest of this query. So that's why we would actually replace this value with our subquery, which we are going to do now. Here is our revised version of the same query. So again, you'll notice we're getting the same two values, name and population. We're still getting it from the country table where the population is greater than. Now, here's where our subquery comes in. So at this point, remember that whenever you are using mathematics and you want something to happen first, you enclose it in parentheses. And so our subquery is enclosed in parentheses, which indicates to the SQL Server engine that this inner part should happen first. So it's going to go and look for the population from the country table where the name is Russian Federation. And what we should then get back is that 146.9, whatever that number was. So that will appear here. And at that point, then the next outer query runs. So we'll say, what's the name? What's the population from the country where the population is greater than whatever that 146 million and some change was? And then when the numbers come back, order them by name. Now, what should happen is in our results, we should really see no change whatsoever, because it is just as if we had used the previous query here. So let's go ahead and run it and let's see what we get. And you'll notice there it is. So no change whatsoever. But this is a simple use of an inner query to return some value that we can then use in a conditional in order to return a result set. There is our first query. So next, let's go ahead and use a subquery, not in the where clause, but in the select clause. So in this second example, I've been to Germany. I really quite like it. And so we are going to use Germany kind of as our catalyst in this query. In Europe, there are many countries. Some of them are very, very small. Others of them are quite large. Russia, or the Russian Federation, is considered to be part of Europe as well as part of Asia. So it'll show up in our results here. We're going to start with a basic query. Show me all of the names and populations of countries, but limit it to the European continent. So let's go ahead and we will run this. And there they are. And so we look down here and we see that we have 46 countries. Now in this case, they are organized alphabetically, just because that's what we put in here was name and population. But remember, our goal here is to ask the question, when we put these countries' populations against Germany's, how do they come up in terms of a percentage? Kind of an interesting thought. And again, it's not too terribly important of a question, but nevertheless, it's an interesting question to consider when we're doing this. So as you can see here, we're going to do something very similar to what we did before, right? We're going to select the name, but now, rather than simply getting the population of all of the countries, because we're interested in how does their population compare to Germany's, we're going to take whatever population we get back, then we're going to divide it by whatever the population is of Germany. So again, select population from country where name equals Germany. There it is. We're going to take their population, we're going to divide it by Germany's population from the country table where the continent equals Europe. So there's our query. So let's go ahead and run this. You'll notice now that rather than seeing their actual populations, we are seeing decimal places. And as we scroll through this list, we'll see that the vast majority of them are less than Germany. And notice there's Germany. It's 1, right? Because its own population divided by its population is 1. And everything here is fairly small until we get down here to ours. And there's the Russian Federation. Now, we already know the Russian Federation's population is almost 147 million. And so it is 1.7 or about about 70% greater population than Germany. All right, that's great. We've answered our question. The problem is, of course, this doesn't look very good. We would really like it to look like a percentage. How do we do that? This is where we're going to use some of our aggregation and some of our formatting functions, which we have used in the past. So let's go ahead and adjust our query to see if we can accomplish that task. You'll notice that I've made some adjustments to this, and I've tried to reorganize it to make it a little bit easier to read. Name and the population divided by the population of Germany, all of that remains the same. What I've done here is I've added 2 additional pieces. So you'll notice, first of all, I'm taking whatever the population is, and because I don't want this to be on the decimal side of things, but I want it to be on the left-hand side, meaning whole numbers, I've taken whatever the result is and I've multiplied it by 100. And instead of having quite so many decimal places to the right, I have said, all right, once I've got that, I'm going to round these numbers and I'm only going to have 1 decimal place. Once again, let's think about what we're doing here. The select gets run first. Whatever the number is that it returns, we're then going to divide that by whatever the population is of the individual country. We're going to then take that number and we're going to multiply it by 100. And finally, we're going to take this new number, we're going to round it and leave 1 decimal place. So that's what we're doing here. So let's go ahead and let's run this and see what we get. Now, when we look at our results down here, you'll notice that we don't have any 4-digit decimal numbers, but instead everything has been rounded up and everything has been limited to a single number on the right-hand side of the decimal point. Now, as we look down through this, though, you'll notice that we have a few issues. Andorra is 1/10 of 1% of the population of Germany. But if we keep looking down, we'll notice that the Faroe Islands are the same. But when we get down to Liechtenstein, it's 0. We obviously know that there are people in Liechtenstein, just like there are in Monaco, and just like there are in Svalbard and Jan Mayen and San Marino and in Vatican City. So they're not empty. We just haven't given them enough decimal points in order to be visible. So that means, one, while it might work, it doesn't reveal an actual percentage for some of these very, very small countries. So we're going to go ahead and adjust this. I'm going to make it 2, and then I'm going to run this again, and then I'm going to check some of these. So notice Andorra isn't even 1/10 of 1%. It's actually 0.9 of 1%. And then if we scroll down, we're still looking. So there's Liechtenstein. Notice it's starting to appear now. We have a value. And if we go down, though, the Vatican City is still not there. All right, so let's make one more change. Let's take it back to 3. Now let's run it. And if we go down to Vatican City, there it is. So Vatican City is 1/1000th of the population of Germany. Not very big, but nevertheless, there it is. Now remember, these are percentages. The problem is we don't really have anything yet to make them look like a percentage. Let's add that piece, and then we will finish up this example. As you can see, all I'm doing is I've now added the concat function around all of the math and the population selection. And then I have told it I want to have a % symbol concatenated along with this number. And then we go ahead and we run it. And now we can see that that is a little bit more along the lines of what we expected to see. Albania is 4.139%. Bulgaria is almost 10. And again, Germany is 100%. And finally, we get down here to the Russian Federation. It's 178, almost 179%. That is the use of a subquery within the select statement itself rather than down here in the where clause. And then, of course, we have simply dressed it up using some of these other features that SQL provides to us. That is our second example. All right, so in our third example, we are going to create and use a duplicate table. And as you can see, the query to do that is fairly straightforward, right? Create a table called city back, and back is shorthand for backup. As select everything from city. So this allows us to have a second copy of the city table, but one in which we can use and play with without actually making any changes to the real city table. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. And now if I reach up and I hit reload, you'll now notice that we have a new table in our tables list of the world database. Once we've got this, we can now run queries against it using subqueries if needed or any other data in order to play with this while still leaving the actual city table alone. So let's go ahead and do an example of that. So this is our next query, and I've done a little bit of cleanup. I'm trying to make this a little bit easier to read. I hope that I'm being successful. So let's look at this query. Let's go ahead and select everything, again, from this new temporary table, city backup. We have a where clause where country code. Now remember, the country code is what connects the city and now the city backup table back to the country table. The problem is we want to get the country code for a group of countries, not for a single country, but for a group of countries that can be found inside of the region of Central Africa. Now, if we wanted to see this, right, we could run a query that simply says, select everything from the country table where the region is Central Africa. And it would then show us all of those countries. But in this case, we don't want to do them independently. we want to do them within this subquery. All right, so this is going to return to us the code that pertains to every single country within the region of Central Africa. We're then going to use that in this outside query to go back and find all of the information where those things match. All right, so let's go ahead, run this, and see what happens. And there we are. So now if we look down through here, we see, okay, well, here is the ID, right, because we said everything. Here's the name, there's the country code, there's the district, and there is the population. And every single one of these countries should belong to the Central Africa region. And there are 38 of them total. Here's where things get fun. We've selected using a subquery. Let's say that we wanted to delete one or more of these cities. We can still use a subquery in order to accomplish that. And that's what we're going to use in this next query that we're going to look at. In this, notice that we're no longer using a select query, but we have changed it to a delete query, right? We're wanting to get rid of information. We're going to delete from our temporary city backup table, again, where the country code can be found in the results of our subquery here. So once again, we're going to select the code from the country where the region is Central Africa. And this should give us, again, 38 rows, I believe it is. But in this case, when it finds these, it's then going to go through and delete each one of those from our city backup table. So any city associated with this region should disappear. All right, now we're going to go ahead and run this. You were not able to see this, but this is the result. Now I want to show this to you, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this response. And then just right here, I'm going to paste it so that we can read it. That's a pretty long response. So let's read what it says. So we have an error, obviously. Its number is 1175. And then it tells us we are using a safe update mode, and we tried to update. Remember, a delete is considered to be an update because it is changing information that exists in the database without a where clause that uses a key column. So if we looked at our where clause, we would find that it does not have a key column in it. Then it tells us if you want to do this, you have to disable safe mode. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Now I'm on a Mac, and so I'm going to go to my MySQL menu. You can't see this, but I'm going to choose Preferences. So if you're in Windows, you're going to do Preferences as well. And it brings up this view. Once we are here, we want to go down and select our SQL Editor option. And in the bottom, you'll notice Safe Updates, rejects update and deletes with no restrictions. So we turn this checkbox off. Now that removes this safeguard, but remember, we're working in a temporary table. So all of our original data remains unchanged and unaltered. So we're happy to do this. We go ahead and click OK. And now if we go ahead and bring this back down, I'm going to just comment this error out. Not going to get rid of it. We're going to comment it out. Here is the query that we just ran. And now we don't have that safety in place. So let's go ahead and run the query. Now, once you've made the change to those preferences, you must restart your servers so that when they start up, they know that they're no longer restricted by this. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I am going to shut down my MySQL Workbench, and I am also going to stop my servers. Once they have stopped, I'm going to restart them. They have restarted, and now I'm going to bring up my MySQL Workbench again, and we are now back to our delete statement. And so having restarted everything, we should now be able to run this query. So let's test it and see what happens. Sure enough, notice I've left my action up here, and you can see that the delete has worked, and we should now have 38 rows gone. And we can, of course, test that by commenting out this delete query, and we can go back and run this query again, and what we expect to find is nothing. So let's go ahead and see if that, in fact, is the case. And sure enough, we received nothing back. So our delete has worked. As you can see, we can create a temporary table to do our testing with, play with it, make sure everything is working right. But if we are attempting to do a delete and our where clause does not contain that primary key value, we have to make sure that we turn off the safe mode. All right, the last thing that I'm going to do is show you how to get rid of that temporary table. And this should look fairly familiar. Remember, we did this really early on. This is the query. It's simply drop table, and then we give it the name of the table. Remember, this is not data manipulation language. This is data definition language, DDL, because it is working with the actual structure of the table itself. And again, once we come over here, we look at our worlds. There is our city backup. Let's now go ahead and run this query, and you'll notice city backup is now gone. So I hope that this video is useful to you to illustrate using a subquery in a select statement, using a subquery in a where statement, and both of those are for selecting. And then finally, how we can use a subquery in a delete as well. But in this case, in order for it to run, you may or probably will have to turn off the safe mode. And then remember, you have to restart everything, and then you should be able to run it. So anyway, there's my video illustrating subqueries. Again, I hope that you will find these helpful.